Oh boy, I sure can't wait to go on another retrieval mission with my fellow research assistant. I know we almost got mauled by a polar bear and never actually recovered the package last time, but hey, I consider that character building. We grow from our failures, right? I told him that. Then he got mad and said failures don't grow back broken bones. What a spoil sport. Ah, right on time. Hey partner, you ready to venture back out into the... Okay, who let Ed 209 in the building?
Management wants me to supervise you on this mission. The administrator wasn't pleased with your recent performance.
Look, in my defense, that was out of my control.
Shut it. Now let's move out. We're wasting time.
Well, since you asked so nicely.
Management tells me you're behind schedule with your reviews.
Oh yeah? It's almost like the research lab has been shut down due to a containment breach. Sounds like a fault with management, doesn't it?
That didn't stop you from doing one in the middle of your mission last time. And don't talk back to me. I outrank you. If you keep doing that shit, I'll write you up for insubordination.
Man, you're a bundle of joy, aren't you? I mean, understood, sir.
That's more like it. Now, management wants you to review the new Warhammer FPS.
Well, guess what? I just played and wrote a review for that.
You did? Why didn't you inform management?
Because I've been busy working on other assignments.
Uh-huh.
And let me tell you, I have plenty to say about Necromunda Hired Gun. That is the new Warhammer FPS you're talking about, right? Before I begin the review, I feel it's important to mention that I am not a student of the Warhammer universe. My knowledge of the franchise comes from the few Warhammer games I've played, random trivia facts from some of my friends, and memes. It's a franchise I've always wanted to get into, but most Warhammer games are strategy games, and my Adderall-ridden Zoomer brain can't handle those. But this one is heavily inspired by games like Doom Eternal, which is absolutely my jam. And hey, with a long-running franchise like this, it's good to get opinions from non-fans to see if it has any appeal outside of its established fanbase. Now let's open this rust-damn door and get started. So Necromunda Hired Gun is a first-person shooter created by Strumon Studio set in the Warhammer 40k universe. This isn't my first experience with the studio, which has created a total of 3 games, 2 being Warhammer related, and 1 that is desperately trying to convince you that it's a Warhammer game. E.Y.E Cybermancy was the first game I played from the studio. Well, played is a generous word. I've started it numerous times, but have never made it further than the tutorial. I know it's cliché to describe an intentionally surreal game as a fever dream, but there really is no better way to describe E.Y.E Cybermancy. Maybe that's due to the bizarre skill tree, visuals, and controls, or maybe it's the convoluted plot made all the more so by the shoddy translation from French to English. Did I mention Strumon is a French studio? It's a fascinating game for sure, and I promise I'll finish it someday. When I do, you can expect a video on it. Space Hulk Deathwing, their second game, I've actually finished. In fact, I played through it earlier last year in the hopes of possibly making a video on it. I scrapped that idea because the video would have just been me repeating ad nauseum. It's an incredible looking game, but boring as shit. In theory, I should love it. It's got a strong sense of atmosphere, and the gameplay is basically Left 4 Dead, but it just didn't click with me for some reason. But we're not here to talk about those games, so let's move on to Necromunda Hired Gun and find out if it's any good, starting with the plot and presentation. Set in the Merchants Guild-controlled Underhive of Necromunda, you play as an unnamed hired gun, with the player choosing their appearance and voice. After a member of the Merchants Guild is murdered, a large bounty is sent out for the murderer's capture, catching the eye of you and other hired guns. Accompanied by 2 hired guns and your loyal mastiff, you successfully track down the culprit and are prepared to take them in and claim the bounty. But the job goes south, resulting in you getting injured and the target slipping away. After being rescued by renowned bounty hunter Kal Wardin, you awaken in Martyr's End with a newly installed cranial implant and a bad temper. Jericho informs you that the murderer, who goes by the title The Silver Talon, is still on the loose and working with the gangs of the Underhive. Now working with Kal Jericho, you must track down and kill the Silver Talon, claiming the bounty that should have been yours to begin with. There we go. A nice straightforward story that gives you just enough context in between missions for a 5-hour long, old-school, action-packed romp. You see, that's what I thought. Remember how I compared this game to Doom Eternal earlier? While that is true, it also shares some DNA with another influential shooter, Borderlands. No, I don't mean it's full of pop culture references and characters that talk non-stop. I mean it's a looter shooter. I'm sure you're thinking, but Borderlands is a fun looter shooter. What's the problem? Fine, let me give you a better example. Shadow Warrior 2. Remember how badly paced the story was and how wildly out of place the looter shooter mechanics were in that game? Unfortunately, Necromunda Hired Gun suffers from those same issues. But let's leave the gameplay alone for now and talk about the presentation. Much like Strumon's previous game, Necromunda Hired Gun also has a rich atmosphere and solid visuals. In my last video, I criticized Binary Domain for having a flat, muted color scheme that, in my opinion, didn't fit the energetic tone of the game. Hired Gun, on the other hand, makes that limited palette work. The hive world of Necromunda has an appealingly grimy look, a mix of gothic and industrial architecture, which the franchise is best known for. As an outsider looking in, this strange combination of aesthetics is why I find the 40k setting appealing, and why I'm frustrated by the lack of Warhammer games that place you front and center in this brutal, dangerous universe where people strapped to machines need to be punched to open doors.
Open this rust damn door!
And I love that the game isn't just an endless series of claustrophobic passages. The levels have some depth and verticality, making them both enjoyable to navigate and interesting to look at. One of the standout levels for me is one where you have to make your way through this colossal train. It's a great level to play through, and the sound of the train rumbling in the background serves as an effective ambient to the ensuing gunfights. But while Hired Gun's atmosphere and visuals deserve plenty of praise, its sloppy presentation of its story deserves criticism, with the third-person cutscenes being the most egregious offenders. For one, they're awkwardly shot, and every time your character is on screen, they are almost always facing away from the camera, mainly to hide the fact that they never bother to animate your character's mouth.
Hey! Hey! Are you big lumps of stem blubber looking for some Orlok scum? I think I found him. Come on over. He's all yours. Now, last chance. Talk.
I guess Kal Jericho is the only one privileged enough to afford lip syncing. Sorry, everyone else. On top of this, every single time the camera cuts to a different angle, the screen fades to black and immediately fades back in. It's incredibly distracting, and only further highlights how stiff, cheap, and unnatural the cutscenes are. But when it's not flaunting its awkward cutscenes, it's doing the BioWare thing where the characters stand in one place and talk at each other. This is seen in the hub area, Martyr's End. Most conversations in Martyr's End go something like this. You walk up to Kal Jericho. He exposition dumps you and sends you to the bartender. You walk up to the bartender. She exposition dumps you and sends you to Jado. You walk up to Jado, and he exposition dumps you too. And after going through all that, you finally have access to the next story mission. I lost track of the number of times this happened. It's such a weird, disjointed way to set up the next mission, and it brings the frantic pacing of the game to a screeching halt. I've talked about the importance of meaningful downtime in previous videos, but this isn't that. It's padding. This shouldn't be 3 separate conversations. It should ideally be one cutscene. Have all of them gather around the bar instead. Look at that. There's plenty of room. I could literally park a truck there. Not only will this cut out the unneeded running back and forth, but it also gives the characters an opportunity to banter, butt heads, strategize, etc. You know, give them some life. A character like Kal Jericho might be a badass to people familiar with the lore, but to someone like me, he was just that guy who sat in the corner of a dingy bar for 90% of the game and exposition dumped the player. It's a shame that I wasn't given a better introduction to him, or any of the characters for that matter. But at least you can pet the dog, so 10 out of 10 I guess. But how does Hired Gun fare in the gameplay department? Is it convoluted like I Divine Cybermancy? Is it as dull as Space Hulk Deathwing? Surprisingly, it's actually fun. Well, when it allows itself to be. As mentioned earlier, Hired Gun is a mashup of several different shooters. The large arenas, takedowns, and expansive arsenal are similar to the new Doom games. The freedom and versatility in your movement is reminiscent of games like Titanfall. And lastly, the loot system and RPG elements bring to mind shooters like Borderlands and Destiny. So how do all these elements fit together? In some cases, well, in others, the opposite. Okay, let's rip this band-aid off right away. Hired Gun's core gameplay is unpolished and janky. That should be obvious, given the studio's history. But I did say it's fun, right? Once you get into it, yes. My initial impressions while playing the first level were negative. The two weapons I started with were boring. Your Mastiff Companion, who you can summon after a short cooldown, dies pretty much the second you call them in. And the loot system felt tacked on and unrewarding. But once I reached Martyr's End, where I unlocked new abilities and weapons, borged out my dog, and acquired the grapnel hook, all of a sudden the gameplay clicked, and I started to enjoy it. However, my thoughts on the loot system and jank didn't change, and if anything, they continued to frustrate me as I imagined what this game could have been like without them. But let's focus on what I liked for now. When it's playing to its strengths, Hired Gun is great fun. The main missions have you fighting through large arenas filled to the brim with the gangs of the Underhive, and you're encouraged to experiment with your abilities and weapons. Double-barrel shotguns, plasma rifles, and the iconic bolt gun are just a few examples of the vast number of weapons at your disposal. While I do wish the sound design was a bit beefier, they're fun to use, and each of them has an appealingly rugged design, with the bolt gun being my favorite looking weapon in the game. But what really makes the combat work for me is the grapnel hook. Why is it called that? It's perfect here, and the level design lets you make great use of it. Zip up to an enemy and shoot him in the face, zip out of the way of an attack, zip across the battlefield, zip up to a ledge, etc. The hit detection for it can be a bit spotty, with the grapnel occasionally failing to connect with a surface or enemy. But in general, it works well, and upgrading it at Martyr's End gives you more charges. If you play this game, upgrade that shit, my dude. Hired Gun proves once again that every game could benefit from the inclusion of a grappling hook. Think of your favorite game, now add a grappling hook. It just got 10 times better, didn't it? Doom Eternal figured that out too. Speaking of new Doom, Hired Gun has its own version of the glory kills from those games, simply called takedowns. What a boring name for a franchise like Warhammer, seriously. But anyway, they're similar to the ones in New Doom, with the difference being you can perform them at any time. Provided they're charged up and you're not attacking a large or shielded enemy, of course. I want to like them since I think the glory kill system is brilliant in New Doom, and it's a perfect fit for the Warhammer universe. But there's a lack of polish that makes them less of a flashy, rewarding mechanic and more of a disorienting, janky gimmick. The animations will frequently not sync up with your target, leading to cases where you're stabbing the air next to the enemy, and it can be hard to tell in the midst of battle when a shielded enemy is open to a takedown. That's what's so great about the glory kills in New Doom. There is a clear indication of when an enemy is vulnerable, avoiding instances like in Hired Gun where you run up to an enemy only to be greeted by their shield. I guess this problem is solved later in the game when you purchase the shock device, an essential upgrade that lets you take down large and shielded enemies. But I stand by my points, and this upgrade feels more like a crutch for bad readability. On the topic of upgrades, your character has access to special augmetics that can be upgraded by the Rogue Doc at Martyr's End. These are a mixed bag, with some being overpowered, others being useless, and some that could potentially be good but are too janky and unwieldy. Haywire Pulse is one of the first abilities you acquire, and it's supposed to knock out enemy shields, allowing you to perform a takedown on them. I found it inconsistent at best, with enemies frequently not being affected. You're better off just upgrading the previously mentioned shock ability. Augur Array helps you find loot chests and highlights enemies. I found it extremely distracting in combat, making me use it exclusively for locating chests. Crush teleports you to the nearest enemy and triggers a small explosion. It's useful, but it's overshadowed by the blast ability, which, when fully upgraded, allows you to turn up to 6 enemies into a fine red mist. Easily one of my favorite abilities in the game. The strength booster is Hired Gun's version of the Crucible from Doom Eternal, except without the lock-on and, like most things in the game, janky. I know lock-on is frowned upon by most people, for good reasons I might add, but some games need it. Otherwise, you get cases like in this game where you swing slightly off to the side and the attack doesn't register. It would definitely make the ability less awkward to use. Rounding off the list are Perfect Aim and Heightened Sense. Perfect Aim is aimbot, allowing you to live out your fantasy as a Warzone streamer. Heightened Sense is bullet time. I have a confession to make. Whenever a game has bullet time, I overuse it. Why? Because I want to turn every game into fear. Okay, but seriously, it's good, and combining it with Perfect Aim makes you almost unstoppable. And then there's your Mastiff. You can call him in to highlight and attack enemies in the environment. In a way, the Mastiff is just a superior version of Augur Array, and while he's not very effective at taking out enemies, he's worth investing upgrades into for that alone. And who doesn't want to turn their dog into a man-made horror beyond our comprehension? Oh no! So, we've talked about the good, the jank, and the, jank. So let's conclude with the bad. If it hasn't been made clear by now, Hired Gun is a deeply flawed game, but its problems aren't limited to its story issues and the occasional surface-level jank. Some run deeper, the most notable being its awful attempts at implementing looter-shooter mechanics. Oh boy, let's talk about that. So loot is dropped by enemies and found in chests hidden in each level. Some are rigged, but can easily be disarmed with a diffuser. The old Counter-Strike adage lives on in the grim-dark future, it seems. Chests contain weapons, attachments, and charms that increase stats and... Sorry, I lost interest halfway through typing that. My point is, I really don't like the loot system. It feels completely out of place and further hurts the game's pacing. It's yet another attempt by a game to appeal to a broader audience and in the end, appealing to no one. It frustrates old-school FPS players by getting in the way of the happy fun murder time, and it fails to win over fans of looter shooters by having boring loot and no endgame. Because the loot in Hired Gun is basically, hey, here's that weapon you have but with slightly bigger numbers, or hey, do you like weapon charms? Here's a shit ton of them. Also, you can't access your inventory during missions, so have fun sorting through all that afterward, okay, bye-bye. But, what? Why? What's the point? And don't tell me it's to streamline the gameplay or whatever, because if you wanted that, you wouldn't have made this game a looter shooter to begin with. If you want to make it that, fine, but don't half commit to it. Like I said earlier, you'll just end up frustrating everyone. So what happens is that you have to sort through all the loot you found at the end of the mission, and my eyes just started to glaze over as I scrolled through a seemingly endless number of charms with minor stat differences. And the weapons I picked up would often be the same as the ones I had, but with, you guessed it, minor stat differences. By the end, I didn't even bother to look at most of the stuff I found, choosing to sell most of it instead, which, thankfully, you can do from the end mission screen. And while I would normally love the inclusion of weapon customization, it's poorly thought out here, and some of the attachments don't make any sense. What made me laugh was when I was scrolling through the laser sites and saw that the downside to all of them read, makes you more visible. Let me ask you this, Hired Gun. Why should I worry about being more visible to enemies in a fast-paced arena shooter? Not to mention, we're also in the same universe where all the guns take up a quarter of the screen if you didn't notice. Subtlety isn't your strong suit. You're Doom, not Splinter Cell. All of this is just bloat dragging down what is otherwise an unrefined but decently entertaining shooter. The same can be said of the side missions, which are just areas from the story mission that have been cut out and given a random objective. Go to a place and kill this guy. Go to a place and kill a group of guys. Go to a place and kill... fans? What? Hired Gun also suffers from some intrusive bugs and stability issues. I'm sure you've noticed that I've had no HUD in some of the background footage. While I would love to tell you that I disabled it to further my immersion, that is not the case. I crashed halfway through the 5th mission, and when I loaded back in, my HUD was gone for the remainder of the level. This happened during a couple of the side missions too. And during one of the game's boss fights, I clipped into the ground and stayed there until, conveniently, I killed the boss. Thanks, hired gun. Any further comments about the visual bugs and glitches would result in me repeating points from earlier. It's time to move on to the conclusion. Now, let's wrap this up. Should you play Necromunda Hired Gun?
Well...
You know, I couldn't decide on how to end the review. I was staring at the blinking bar in my Google Doc for a good 10 minutes before I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, which isn't too different from what I do every afternoon. When I started thinking about the fun I had with the gameplay, my mind would immediately drift back to the game's shortcomings. I don't know, I really wish Steam had a mixed button.
Well, it doesn't, and you're already on thin ice with management. So finish the review, asshole. What's the verdict? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
How about a thumbs up with some caveats?
Fine, but I'm still writing you up for wasting my time.
Oh, this is possibly the most generous thumbs up I have ever given. Because while Necromunda Hired Gun's core gameplay is fun, almost everything else surrounding it ranges from mediocre to bad. The poorly implemented looter-shooter mechanics and badly paced story serve only to waste your time, and the game, overall, suffers from a lack of polish. But underneath its many issues lies a fast, frantic, ultra-violent shooter that will mostly scratch that Doom itch. It gives you plenty to work with in both weapons and abilities, and the open level design lets you put all of it to good use. I think you'll have fun with it, even if you're not a Warhammer fan. Also, it has a grapnel hook. I can't complain about that. Recommended, but wait for a deep sale.
And then, payday.
And that'll do it. I'll see you all in the next video. Oh, and before I forget, I'm now posting updates on the community tab of the channel, so if you want to know the status of the next video, be sure to check it out. Alrighty, thanks for tuning in. Okay, we're done. That good enough for management?
For now. They're still not gonna be happy you didn't review Darktide, and for the record, neither am I.
Yeah, tell me what's new. I know, you'll write me up. I get it, I'll stop.
Management also wants you to review the Saints Row reboot.
Oh, piss off.